So happy once again to be joined by JHK, senior MMA writer for the AllStar. How you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing good, doing good. How are you?
I'm good. Let's start with UFC London coming up. Everybody looking forward to this, and I think it offers a lot of versatility for fight fans. So give us the three main fights that you're kind of keeping your eye on at UFC London.
The first fight is the major debut of one of the probably highly touted prospects we've seen come along in a long time, Mohammed Mokaev. He went like 22, 23-0 as an amateur fighter, won multiple world titles as an amateur, and I believe he's 5-0 now as a professional, making his UFC debut in his new home of England. And he's facing off against Cody Durden, a guy that's coming up in the flyweight division. It's perfect for him because I feel like a lot of people want the fast track for Mokaev, and this is the biggest test for him, is someone that has had a few fights in the UFC that will bring the fight to him. I'm really looking forward to that. Another major fight will be the co-main event of between Arnold Allen and Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker had a long stint as a lightweight, and now he's coming back down to featherweight and facing off against a top 10 guy. I feel like if Dan can go in there and take out Arnold Allen, who is on an 8-fight winning streak, hasn't been beaten in the UFC yet, he could put himself right into the title mix at featherweight. And Arnold Allen, vice versa, same thing. If he beats Dan Hooker, he puts a major, a big name on his resume and pushes him forward in that featherweight division. A lot of people have their eyes on Arnold Allen. This is the big test, and we're going to see if he comes out on top. And of course, Paddy the Baddy, he's making headlines all the time. We're going to see him face off against Vargas. Vargas, he's a decent test. A lot of people think that this is kind of a setup fight for Paddy because the UFC wants him to succeed. We will see, because Vargas is not going to go away easy. I feel like Vargas comes in as the favorite, but like, most times in the UFC, if they want you to win, they'll give you somebody that will allow you to win. And we'll see what happens to Paddy, because at the same time he's fighting in London, his hometown, so to say, and there's gonna be a lot of pressure on him. Vargas, I don't think so much, but we'll see. The crowds are back too, so that puts another element into it.
Yeah, with Paddy, it seems like he thrives in that chaotic environment, that thrill, that big thrill environment. But like you say, this is going to be a test at home. I mean, how do you expect him to respond?
I expect him to respond really well because he's performed at home many, many times, before entering the UFC. I feel like he's a guy that feeds off the crowd. So it's gonna erupt in the arena when maybe he gets into a flurry in the cage, and he'll feed off that, I think. And I think, he's gonna probably end up finishing this fight, or he will get finished, because we've seen in his debut that he, it's not like he has the best defense. He goes out there to bang, so to say. So we'll see an exciting matchup.
If by some chance he does end up losing in this matchup, I mean, how would that affect his long-term future in the sport?
It won't affect anything. I feel like if he does, if he lose, he'll just get another matchup. And in this sport, it's not like boxing. You can lose and you could come back. We've seen it many, many times. Guys that lose, go on losing streaks, get cut by the UFC, go to the regional scene, win a few comebacks, get re-signed, and then win the title. We've seen it with Brandon Moreno in the flyweight division, and another good example would be Charles Oliveira. He didn't get cut by the UFC, but he was a guy that was kind of like win lose, exciting guy, but just win lose until he found that secret recipe for himself, and now he's sitting on top of the lightweight division as probably one of the best in the world.
What do you make of Paddy's rise up to the octagon? I mean, what has kind of impressed you about him outside of all the flair and everything that everybody likes? I mean, what actually impresses you about what he's able to do?
What impresses me is that he can draw attention, and he only has one fight in the UFC, which is amazing. It's like I think every fighter would want that. Everybody would want that attention, and he just has that recipe. I don't know what it is about him. It's not really his fighting style, I don't think, because we haven't really seen that much from him. We've only seen one fight in the UFC. Most UFC fans only watch the UFC, so they don't watch like the rise and the come up of certain fighters. But when you got a country behind you, and when I think it's the accent too. You know, everybody loves the Liverpool accent. Darren Till was the one that introduced it to us as fans, fight fans, and Paddy the Baddy is just continuing that. He's just taking that torch and running with it.
Yeah, people have likened him to like a Conor McGregor type. Is that fair so early on, especially like you said, he's something of an unproven, even though he seems to have the marketing side figured out.
I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair when you compare anybody to Conor McGregor, because one thing Conor has that Paddy, he hasn't shown it yet, but Conor has the death touch with his left hand, and that equalizes everything inside the cage. Because at the end of the day, you got to win. You know, you could be the best talker, you know, in the history of the sport, but if you don't win, then they can't carry you into big fights. So Paddy hasn't really shown it. He did get the knockout in his first fight in his debut, but he doesn't have that knockout power like Conor does. Conor is just, you know, he's an anomaly with it.
Let's look back a little bit and kind of recap UFC 272, specifically Colby Covington. I mean, he won in pretty dominant fashion, I would say. Most people would say. What's next for him?
Well, he's been in the media and he's been calling out people. You know, that's just something that he does, and you know, he does well. The options that he thinks he has is Dustin Poirier, which Dustin Poirier doesn't seem like he wants to fight Colby Covington, and it's not because he doesn't want to beat him up. It's just that he's kind of stepped over the line and it's beyond, you know, competition. It's like really personal for him, and I understand that because Colby has said some things about his family that I think you know, anybody would be offended by. And then Colby is going after Israel Adesanya now. I feel like Colby just wants to go after the biggest names and the biggest fights, and I don't blame him for that. But in all honesty, in reality, he should be fighting a top 10 welterweight next. Maybe the winner of Gilbert Burns and KHAMZAT CHIMAEV that's happening at UFC 273 in a month or so, or the winner of Vicente Luque and Bilal Muhammad that's happening the week after. I think those fights are the fights that Colby should be matched up in. The reason why I say that is because he doesn't really have any wins against any of the top guys except for Jorge Masvidal, who he just beat at UFC 272, and a lot of people feel like he's not even a top 10 guy anymore.
So Poirier, you think it's because of how personal everything got and not necessarily him wanting to switch up the weight classes or fearing a matchup. He felt like he crossed the line.
Yeah, he said it in interviews to where like he crossed the lines, you know, he stepped over the line so far that he doesn't want Covington to benefit monetarily off, you know, him, you know, off his name. And I think Poirier is chasing after other names. He has better options to make more money, which is Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor. Like if you have those names in your sights, Covington would be in, you know, he'd be in the trunk, so to say. He wouldn't be even a thought.
When you look at UFC 273 coming up on April 9th, I mean, I'm just looking at the list here. It's a card that, for a fight fan, seems unbelievably stacked. I mean, let's start with Volkanovski and the Korean Zombie. How do you see this matchup unfolding? Who has the edge?
The edge I always will give to Volkanovski because he is one of the greatest minds in the sport right now. I actually just got off doing an interview with Volkanovski, speaking with him, and yeah, he seems like he has hit another gear. That's how he's explaining it, to where he feels kind of unbeatable. You know, like his mind is there, and the thing is, he doesn't get caught up in the action. You know, he doesn't want to go in there and become this brawler. He's a technician, right? He's become this technician, and I feel like if he fights his fight, it's an easy fight for him. You know, the Korean Zombie, his chances, I believe, will be in the early rounds if he can clip Volkanovski and maybe submit him, or, you know, even knock him out, because he does have the power to do it. The Zombie, he's gone through the ringer. You know, he's been in so many like brawls and he's taken a lot of damage. He's been through so many surgeries, and I believe that this could be his last fight. If he loses this fight, we might see him retire. That's the that's the word out there, you know, in Korea. You know, a lot of people are saying is that this could be his last chance at a title, and the last time we will see him fight in the octagon if he loses. Yeah, Volkanovski, he's just at another level. I don't think there are many guys in that featherweight division that can match his IQ, his just improvisation in the cage and game planning. And the Korean Zombie, it's almost like it's too late. He's 35 years old. If Zombie fought him at maybe 30 years old, at that age, maybe it would have been a different fight. But I think Volkanovski goes in there and gets a late finish or a clear decision.
Volkanovski has said all the right things about wanting to fight the best. You really believe what he says in terms of his confidence about the opponents that he's targeting. I mean, what other insight did you glean from speaking with him ahead of what will be a huge event for him? And as you say, a very winnable match for him.
He said that just recently he kind of turned the focus more on winning for himself rather than proving to everybody, to all the doubters, to the haters, because he went through a lot with those Max Holloway fights. A lot of people are like, you lost both of those. There's a lot of people online, a lot of Max Holloway fans that went at Volkanovski, even pundits, like talking heads, analysts. They thought Max Holloway won those fights, and Volkanovski uh, said that kind of got into his head for a little bit, but now it's not. Now it's just about him going out there and winning for himself, his team, and his family. Fighters can say a lot of things in interviews, but we don't know what's really going on behind the scenes. And maybe he kind of revealed that to us, that in those interviews, in those fights, he said certain things, but really he was the talk got into his head. And now I'm just wondering, like, what are we going to see from Volkanovski? Are we going to see a more violent Volkanovski in this fight? The Korean Zombie always has a puncher's chance, right? But age and wear and tear is just something that, you cannot deny.
It's interesting that you say that because we think about a lot of other athletes who have been really candid about some of the things that they struggle with mentally, but for whatever reason, from the outside, somebody naive like myself who really isn't inside the sport like you kind of think about these MMA fighters as like a different kind of animal mentally. Maybe it's just the brashness, the way that they target their opponents, how public they are with, the way that they call one another out. So, were you surprised to hear that Volkanovski was dealing with what sounds like, a crisis of confidence or letting too much of that external noise in? Was that something that surprised you?
Not really. I think a lot of fighters battle with that, and Volkanovski is a champion, right? And at the highest level, there's fighters at the lowest level battling with that, and they haven't been through anything yet. And just a little adversity, just an injury can affect you for many, many fights. And Volkanovski, I like that he kind of revealed that to us, that it kind of shows you that everyone is vulnerable. Everyone, there's a lot of pressure. Even when I interviewed Gilbert Burns just recently, he said the same thing, that the pressure of title fights, the pressure of number one contender fights is just something that us regular people will never understand. They will never understand that pressure and losing, and coming back, all that stuff, and even winning, and then the added pressures of winning, and you have to continue winning. And he praised Kamaru Usman, the welterweight champ, of just being mentally, like, just being a mental giant to take on guys and call guys out and call his shots and continue winning and winning. And it is amazing to me too. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've told me before, like it's hard to pinpoint how much of it's mental and how much of it's physical. But in a sport that, seems almost entirely physical, the mental piece is such a huge piece of it. I just, before we move on, I want to give people a chance to find some of these conversations that you're having with these fighters. So what's the best way to get to AllStar, to link up to either your Twitter page or something so they can watch some of these conversations that you're having with these guys?
You could go to my Twitter page at JHKMMA, or you can visit the AllStar IO, or you could go to the AllStars YouTube page, and you can check out the interviews. They're all in video form, and there are written articles out there.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's awesome. So you look down the rest of the card, right? You've got a big rematch that seems like people have been talking about for at least a calendar year now, and Sterling and Jan. And I think one of the big storylines was his corner not available to get a visa entry into the United States. What's the latest with that?
I believe that his corner, they're not going to be able to travel with him. It's I don't think it's going to affect Peter Yan. I think Peter Yan, from what I heard, that he kind of controls everything in his camp, right? He controls who's the coaches, who's the corners, who's the training partners. He's the guy, right? It's very rare at the top of the sport where a guy doesn't have a head coach. He's his head coach, right? He brings in the people that he needs, and I think that he's fully prepared. He's one of those guys that are just a fighter 100%. So it doesn't matter who he's with. He'll travel alone. He'll probably end up bringing somebody along that he has already in the U.S. to corner him. But at the end of the day, once you step inside that octagon, it's just him versus Aljamain, and he knows that it's not going to affect him at all.
These two have been talking to each other nonstop for an entire year. I mean, how do you see this meeting playing out?
I see it playing out a little different. Aljamain in the first fight, he came out and he had a great game plan. He pressured Peter because he knows Peter is a guy that kind of sits back the first couple of rounds, and Aljamain went in there and took advantage of that. But then eventually his gas tank failed him, and also he had the neck injury, right? The neck injury, and that could have had an effect on his performance as the fight went along. And but I think Peter, he just gets better every fight. Aljamain's neck is fine. He had the surgery. I spoke to one of his main training partners, one of his good friends, Steve Lee, and he told me that Aljamain is looking better than ever. He's doing things that just that just is amazing in the training room, and he's ready for this fight. But I just, from the performances that we've seen between these guys, and Peter has fought since that last fight to capture the interim title. I don't know. I think Peter Yan goes in there and does what he always does. He sits back the first couple of rounds, and then he turns it up in the third round, fourth round, and probably ends up finishing Aljamain. But if Aljamain can hang on, win the first couple of rounds and then hang on and use his wrestling continuously, just wrestle to kind of eke out rounds, he could win the fight. But I don't think his wrestling's that good. Well, his wrestling is really, really high level, but compared to Peter and battling with Peter in that wrestling department, I think Peter will be able to handle his own and win this fight.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say too that not having your normal people in the corner for a fighter like that won't necessarily have the impact that many might expect, because you look at that again from an outsider and think that might have like a very detrimental impact, not being able to travel, not having the people that you're comfortable with around you. But from his strategy, what he does, laying back and then getting aggressive, like you mentioned later on, kind of building momentum, he deserves all the credit for that. That's not strategy related. That's coming from the corner. Is he the fighter that has, the sense and the feel for when to attack and how to size up an opponent?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that's what separates him from everybody else on the roster. Every other fighter that we've seen, probably in the history of the sport, I think that is just something unique about him, to where he just knows what he needs and he understands what he can implement. And it's almost just like, if you're fighting him, you gotta just be able to handle that. What he's going to do. Is just stopping him, and we haven't seen that yet at all. So let's see if Aljamain's he's going to be able to do that. You know what I mean? I'm really excited about this fight. The reason why is Aljamain's going to step in there 100%, and we'll get to see 100% version of Aljamain versus Peter.
Let's see. What else are you looking forward to for 273 overall? I mean, those are kind of the big ticket items for a preview, but for a real fighting fan who's invested in 273, I mean, what else will you be keeping your eye on?
Of course, Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat Chimaev is probably the hottest ticket on the card. We got two title fights, but a lot of people have their attention on Khamzat Chimaev. He has blown onto the scene and drawn so much attention. People believe that he is the next champ. He's the uncrowned champ in that welterweight division. The only criticism is he hasn't faced top 10 competition, and Gilbert Burns is ranked, I believe, number 2. So he's going to be able to prove to everybody if he is title worthy. And Gilbert Burns is not a person that you can just step over. He is a hard fight for anybody. His style is so unique because he comes from this grappling background, and he's probably one of the best grapplers in the world in the grappling circuit, pure grappling. And then he's added the striking to his arsenal with Henry Hoof over at Sanford MMA, and he's been getting knockouts. So Khamzat, everybody talks about his strength and his technique and his almost his like invincibility that he has inside that cage. We'll get to see that against Gilbert Burns. I'm excited for this fight. I think this fight is going to be the fight of the night. I think these guys are going to show us what real fighting is about.
What's your prediction in the fight in terms of the ultimate outcome, and how does a grappler, somebody that has that kind of style, how advantageous can that really be when you're facing an opponent that's been as elusive as he's been?
It's hard to say because you got a wrestler in CHIMAEV, and then you got like a jiu-jitsu, submission grappler in Burns. So there's going to be a lot of scrambles. I believe this fight will play out on the ground a lot, and it's all about, can CHIMAEV control Burns and kind of like ground and pound. I think ground and pound will be a big aspect in this fight. If they stand up, it's anybody's game. I think it's going to go to a decision. It's hard to say who's going to win, but I'm leaning towards Burns because he's more proven. He's fought in title fights. He's fought in #1 contenders. He's beaten former champions. CHIMAEV hasn't done none of that. So I'm always going to go with the vet, the guy that has proven more.
I just wanted to ask you one more thing before we let you go. I saw something on AllStar, I think that you wrote or something that was posted to the site about the evolution of women in the sport that I thought was really interesting. You had something on your Twitter page about how, the way that we're viewing women in MMA is changing. And before it was, I don't want to say objectifying women, but very much about how they look, how attractive they are. How is it morphing into something else, something more substantial as of late?
The article was actually written by Roxanne Modafferi. She recently retired from the UFC, 18 years fighting. So she's been through everything. She's seen everything. And she's the one who wrote the article. The morphing of women's MMA has been amazing to watch, amazing, because we've seen it go from just the skill level wise, just women just being able to just go in there and knock other women out, which I feel like a lot of people could not accept for a long time, right? Like just the violence, right, between women. The sexualization of women in sports is always going to be there, I believe. I mean, I think it's always going to be there. It's not because like I focus on it, it's because the fans will focus on it. So it's always going to be there. But I feel like the skill level has caught up. The skill level, it's still getting better. There's still fights that are not that exciting, but there's fights that are not exciting with men all the time, and people don't focus on that, right? But with women's MMA, I love watching it. I feel like there's so many talented women out there, and there's going to be a next Ronda Rousey. It's going to happen. You do have Kayla Harrison out there, and then you do have like the Amanda Nunes and Thug Rose, Namajunas. But I feel like we still haven't seen the Conor McGregor of women yet. I feel like it's gonna come. It's gonna happen in the next 10 years.
That's a fascinating topic. JHK, thanks so much for everything. You're the best. Anything else you want to shout out that you guys are working on or that we didn't cover?
Yeah, we're working on this series called The Real Fight Island, which is about Phuket, Thailand, and all the like major players on that island, and how the pandemic affected so much, the world of Muay Thai, the world of MMA down there. And yeah, just go check it out on the AllStar. And we're putting out a new one every week. So it's interesting. It's just something that's different from like the everyday news cycle of like who said this about who said that about, like that. So go check it out.
Yeah, get away from some of the middle school stuff and actually look at something of substance and how the pandemic is affecting the sport. That's really fascinating. We'll have you back on to talk about that for sure once you guys drop a couple of those. Thanks so much for being with us as always, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.